Welcome to Remember Me by Intervivos, the show about living life to its fullest, leaving a legacy, and deciding how you will be remembered. And now, your humble team of expert planners, taking the legal world by storm.
Hey everybody, welcome to Remember Me, the show where we talk about leaving a legacy, being remembered, and what to do during life to make sure that that your legacy continues after you're gone. We're excited to talk a little bit today. I'm here with Mike Black in studio, and we have a guest, Garrett Smith, one of the attorneys here with Intervivos. And what we're going to talk about today is kind of a continuation of last week's topic. Last week we talked a little bit about Martin Luther King Jr. and his estate, and we talked about his legacy and what he's left behind. At the time, he didn't have very much property in his estate, and so the majority of what has been left is just specific items that he had in everyday life that have taken on meaning over time. And most of us have items that we use on a daily basis that have sentimental value for our family that might not have other value otherwise. What we want to talk about a little bit today is some of the strategies and things to consider when you're looking at your own personal life and belongings, and what you can do to be able to leave more inherent value as you leave those items behind. So, Garrett, can you hear us? Well, we're going to try to bring him in just a little bit. Let's start with just talking a little bit about, in our day-to-day life. Mike and I were talking about this earlier. There are items that I know that my great-grandparents had before he passed away that the family has fought over, who gets what and how it's divided, and most of us want to make sure that conflicts like that are avoided at all costs as part of our estates, but we never imagine what kind of conflicts can come up simply because we think people are going to get along, and they generally do, but it's something weird that happens. It's like almost like we revert back to when we were kids, right? And right. Susie didn't get along with Johnny, and now they're fighting again, but they're adults, and they're reverting back because of the emotional attachment to this stuff.
Right. With my family, I think about them as well because my parents are still alive. And there's some things that, my dad's got a lot of guns. I mean, we used to go deer hunting all the time as kids. And my brothers, I still have five brothers alive. And we always talk about how, we always want Dad's 30-30. Everybody wants Dad, or Grandpa's 30-06 because it has a special customized scope. Those kinds of things, we tie those back to memories of either with Dad, with Grandpa, and those kinds of things, so we always tease about, we're tease kind of half-heartedly, joking, but kind of arguing about who's gonna get them. But we don't know who's gonna end up with them. But there are a lot of things like that because there's shotguns. Dad's got a ton of things.
Well, and gun collections are a perfect example because it's something that's can be very sentimental, and there's people in the family that it might have some value just as an item. But mostly it's a sentimental item. And I remember, as an attorney, as we handle cases, a lot of times the gun collection is the first thing that's fought over. And a lot of times, believe it or not, it's not the person that actually wants the guns that's fighting over it. It's the person who doesn't want the guns that's taking it just to spite the person who does want it. Oh, right?
Yeah.
And,
interesting way to look at things, sibling rivalries.
The gloves come off when it gets down to that point. But, some of the common things that these fights happen over, and by the way, there was an LA Times article just a couple years ago that talks about how the majority of battles and court conflicts that happen as part of somebody's estate are over personal property. It's not over the money. It's not over the accounts. It's usually not over, the things that we would imagine. It's over the simple things, the little things. And, we had a client story where, there was two sisters. They were raised by grandma. Grandma put them to bed every night brushing their hair. And when grandma dies, they both want that hairbrush. And they spent thousands of dollars fighting over the hairbrush.
Hairbrush they could have gotten for what?
Oh, a few dollars. Oh, yeah. And there's no rhyme or reason to it, but it's because of the emotional attachment.
Right.
So, Garrett, I know that you're on. Garrett, you're one of the attorneys that works here with Intervivos, and obviously, as we plan leaving a legacy and use instruments and stuff that we'll talk a little bit about today, it's one of those things in your wheelhouse. Garrett, do you have any stories or anything that you want to share of what are the things that you find that most people are worried about in terms of personal property that they want to leave to family?
Well, in my line of work and business, I focus on gun trusts, and so guns can actually be one of those things that are sentimental. Maybe someone learned how to shoot, or this was, they went out with their son, and this specific rifle was the rifle that they used to shoot their first deer, and they wanted to go specifically to the son. So that's one example. Some other examples are just antiques. It could be pianos, paintings, things like that mean something. In fact, I have one client who wants their piano to go to the son who learned how to play it, rather than the others who didn't really play it, right? I mean, they played it, but they didn't learn on that piano. And so there's a lot of these things that they just want to pass on that have more than just monetary value.
When you mentioned collections,
to the right person.
You mentioned collections. I think that's a big area where people have items that really should stay together in some ways, or it should be divided out for people to in the family to all get a piece of. Guns are a perfect example, but I remember sitting with somebody who had a fishing rod collection, and they had hundreds of these fishing rods, and they lived to fish, right? But that's the first thing that everybody says: who's going to get the fishing rod collection, right? So that client that you talked about with the piano, what are ways that people can decide beforehand, or how would they actually decide who they leave that piano to, so that there's not conflicts?
So they need to make sure that it's in writing. A lot of times an oral agreement doesn't have the weight or doesn't have the force to make sure that all the other family members are aware of who that was supposed to go to. So I've seen people fight over a lot of things because they'll both claim that the parents said that they could have it. And so by putting it in a writing that's signed and that isn't conflicting with another writing is a great way to do it. And a lot of times it's as simple as a personal property memorandum attached to a trust, where you can itemize certain items, you name the person that you want to receive it, and I always say, you can do a new personal property memorandum if you change your mind in 5 years, but shred the old one because you don't want to have two documents that say different things. And so I love our process and how we do it because we talk about, these are some of the issues that may come up in the future. This is how you avoid it. And, using that personal property memorandum is a great way to pass on things to who you want to receive them.
So, Garrett, I know that it's really common for, especially some of our older clients to, instead of writing it down in a list like a personal property memorandum, they'll take masking tape and they put it on, each item, and then they'll write somebody's name on it. Why is that not a good idea?
So I'm glad you brought that up because I've been working with the client, and they actually have traveled all over the world, and they have a lot of these pieces from different countries, and they're just beautiful. They took me on a tour. It ended up being, a really long visit. It was really cool to see everything, and they weren't using masking tape. They were using sticky notes.
Right.
And, one of their daughters was there, and they're like, well, I can just move this sticky note to another place. I can just switch a sticky note with something else that I want. This isn't a great way to do it because I was talking about the value of, putting everything in writing, having a memorandum where you can list it, and the parents are like, okay, fine, maybe it wasn't a good idea to just put these sticky notes, and it was something their daughters had been trying to convince them of for a little while as well. So it makes a big difference to have it in writing. maybe more of a personal experience for me. My grandpa passed away before I was born, and sometimes it's not necessarily even the kids that are going to fight, but maybe the in-laws. When you have those that marry into the family, and they may not understand the sentiments and the value of not just monetarily, but the sentimental value of certain items, they may try and step in and take something because they really like it. And I know that it's just causes problems, and even in my own family,
to most people, it's just stuff. So we'll be back in just a couple minutes here with Garrett Smith from Intervivos on Remember Me. Remember Me. We're here with Garrett Smith from Intervivos, and we're just talking a little bit about, when you have collections, when you have sentimental items as part of what you own, how do you leave those without causing problems later? And real quick, Garrett, tell us a little bit about, your experience as an estate planner. When you sit down with people, how does this come up in conversations?
It seems like there's always a few items that have a lot of value. And maybe it's to multiple people, maybe it's to only one of the kids. But there's always those few items that sometimes even the parents are saying, well, these might be a problem. And, it's not that everything in the household has that type of value, but I rarely find a family that doesn't have something that they want to go to someone. And so it just comes up in the conversation, especially when we're going through and we're talking about different trust assets that they can put in their personal property and how they'd like to leave it. Then it'll usually come up in a question. And if not, I'll ask a question and it'll open up this longer discussion because it's been on their mind.
So, often when we sit with people, the most common response we get to estate planning is they say, well, I don't really own much. I don't have very much value, and it should be really simple. Divide everything in equal shares to the kids and done, right? And I don't care about the stuff. They can sell it. Do you think that most families feel the same? The kids, the beneficiaries, the heirs, do they feel the same?
I would say no, they don't. And I've heard that exact same line as you just described. And then even as I'm asking more questions and talking about different things, they'll reverse that, or they'll try and backtrack a little bit and say, oh, actually, I guess there is this. Oh, and we have this. Oh, and by the way, we have this too. And so they'll start thinking of those things. But, one thing that I have found to be helpful in a lot of cases is when I meet with someone and I just have the discussion, they say, well, can I have my child there, my son or daughter? And I was like, yeah, that's fine. And so they'll come, and it's usually the one they want to be the trustee to kind of have a little more understanding of what's going on, how things work, how they can keep things up to date. And just like you said, it may mean more to the kids because a lot of times they'll be the ones that say, well, you have, this item, whether it's a gun or piano, some of those things that we've mentioned. And I know that so-and-so wants this, or even a book collection. I was meeting with a client recently, and they had this great book collection, and all of the kids wanted certain books because they'd grown up reading them. And so a lot of times it is initiated by the kids.
Yeah, so Mike was telling me earlier before the show a little bit about, some of the items that he's found in his dad's attic that he didn't think were valuable. Tell us a little bit about what you were sharing with me.
Well, when I was growing up, we raised show horses, and before I was actually around much, we had this Grand Champion stallion, And I walked down to the basement one time at Grandma's house, and I saw all these trophies, all these trophies, and just all sorts of awards that he'd received. And also I saw this parade saddle in there. I don't know where those things are right now. They've disappeared, and I've got to talk to my dad and find out what happened to them, because they were probably dispersed between the 3 siblings: my dad, his sister, and his brother. But those kinds of things, I look forward to. I saw Grandpa had a couple of swords too. I thought these are cool because they were Civil War swords, and I don't know what happened to them, and I don't think my dad knows what happened to him either.
And whether they have real value, monetary value, or not.
That's not the not the point. The
Yeah.
point is they were, my grandpa's and my grandma's. And I remember when my grandma died, we went through some of the things she had, and I don't remember anything. I don't think I got anything from them because there's nothing there that I had any attachment to.
Well, you were telling me that, that you had gone through some of the stuff in your dad's attic, and you were wondering why he hadn't thrown it out.
Oh, that's right, because he had all the buggies and things that they used for Sermingo. And he was, like I said, the grand champion stallion. And best to show, they had to change the rules for him. And I understand now why Dad couldn't throw him out, because he's got some value there. He has some sentimental value because he was the only one of the siblings that actually worked the horses with Grandpa. He was out in the barn all the time. He was working the horses, doing all these things, teaching us how to do the same thing. And Dad doesn't want to go through that. And he's getting to the point where we're going to have to do that. But I don't want, it's just stuff to some of my brothers, but it's got a lot of value to him. And I can understand why he doesn't want to throw it away.
We think about this stuff sometimes as junk, and why hasn't it been thrown away yet? But the point is not what monetary value it has. The point is what kind of sentimental value it has and what memories are attached to it, right?
Absolutely.
Because once a memory becomes attached to something, then now there's a lot more sentimental value.
And I think sentimental value, you can't put a price tag on that.
Yeah.
It's priceless.
Definitely. So, when we do planning, a lot of times one of the things we look at is advising people and teaching them how to leave a legacy of values instead of just stuff, instead of just money, instead of just, belongings. And the recipe to do that is, number one, to have, written guidelines like Garrett was talking about, and then have an expression of values that you're leaving of what is important to you and, why. And then beyond that is leaving those stories, because we all have stories in our lives, and if you don't leave those stories that attach to your expression of values, then they might not share the values. They won't even understand why you hold those values because they don't know the story behind it.
Absolutely,
right?
Absolutely.
So Garrett, tell us a little bit about, what are some ways or documents or tools that to use to be able to, leave these expressions of values or stories or even these guidelines. What would you recommend, as we sit with clients, of some of the strategies that they can use to be able to address these things?
So one that I'll bring up first is the ethical will. And when I first heard that term, I was like, well, what does that mean? And I really had to go do a little research and figure out what that was.
Because it's not actually a legal document, right?
Right. It's nothing binding. It's nothing that if you took to court, they'd say, okay, well, in the ethical will, it says that you appreciate hard work. And so you need so we're going to say that you have to work 40 hours a week. No, it's really just a way to memorialize and bring together some of these values in a way that can be passed on to the next generation. What a lot of people don't realize is a lot of our history comes from journals and diaries from people that were in the Revolutionary War, the Civil War. We learn a lot about culture and some of these ideas and concepts and what was going on in people's minds by these diaries. Well, in our day, sometimes we think that our life is pretty boring and maybe we don't have anything to add. And so we don't make notes. We don't put anything in writing. And we don't have that ability to pass on the things that we know and that we want our kids to know. And so the ethical will, for example, let's say that it can be used in a series of circumstances. It could even be used as your family is growing and you are just wanting to basically encapsulate some of these values that you can pass on to those that are entering the family. But a lot of people will use an ethical will towards the end of their life as a reflective tool. And it's been amazing to see that when you have to put it in writing, it becomes more permanent. And the exercise is just as meaningful for the person that's writing the ethical will as for the people they're writing it for. And
the other way
ahead.
to think about that is it's a final expression or final letter to your family of what's important to you, right? That's where I see a lot of people get emotional as they go through that process of thinking, what would I tell my family if I couldn't talk to them again?
And it's a healthy exercise to not even do on your deathbed, because as you do this exercise and you're focusing in on what's really important, time with family is often the top of the list. And so you can even maximize more of your time before you leave by putting it down in writing and helping you focus on that for the rest of your life.
That's what they say is on your deathbed, nobody wishes they would have worked more, right?
Right.
So definitely something to consider while we're alive. And before we kind of end this session, we'll be back in just a little bit. Just want to leave the number for Intervivos if anybody has questions or, how do you address this type of planning, or if you want to meet with somebody who can help you with a consultation. The phone number is 855-335-1060. That's 855-335-1060.